The silence of space had always been a comforting, endless void to the explorers of the galaxy. The stars were distant, cold points of light, barely visible even through the most advanced telescopes. But that day, the silence was broken. Deep within the outer reaches of the galaxy, a signal was detected. It wasn't just a random burst of energy. It was structured, purposeful. It echoed through the vastness, old and ancient. It was a call from something that had been lost to time, a warning perhaps, or a message from a civilization long forgotten. The crew of the exploration vessel Starlight was the first to hear it. They had been charting the uncharted, exploring the farthest edges of the known galaxy, when the signal began to break through their communication systems. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It was faint at first, a soft hum that seemed to fade in and out, but it grew stronger as they followed its course. The Starlight moved closer to the signal's source, its crew unsure of what they might find. Captain Elena Reynolds was the first to stand up from her seat. Her sharp eyes scanned the star maps on the screen. "Can we isolate it?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of curiosity. "Aye, Captain," replied Lieutenant Marcus Haynes, her communication officer. His fingers flew across the control panel, trying to make sense of the strange signal. "It's old, Captain, really old. It's not from any known source in our records." The crew stared at the screens as the signal intensified. It was like an echo from the past, and it seemed to pull them in, urging them to go further into the uncharted darkness. There was something about the signal, something familiar yet strange. It wasn't just a distress call, it had purpose, and that purpose felt ominous. "Prepare for a close approach," Captain Reynolds ordered. "We need to know where it's coming from. Stay alert, everyone." The Starlight shifted course, its engines humming as it sped toward the coordinates. The stars seemed to stretch out of shape as the ship cut through the void, moving closer to the source of the signal. The crew could feel the tension building as they neared their destination. What could it be? What kind of ancient message had been left behind in the cold void of space? As the ship approached, something remarkable came into view. Floating in the darkness of space, almost as if it had been waiting for them, was a massive ship. It wasn't just any ship, it was a warship, an imposing behemoth that towered over anything the crew had ever seen. Its massive hull was covered in thick, alien designs, glowing faintly with a strange energy that seemed to pulse with life. The ship was unlike any they had encountered before. Captain Reynolds' breath caught in her throat. She had seen many things in her time as a captain, but nothing like this. "What is that?" she whispered under her breath, unable to take her eyes off the enormous craft. "A warship," Lieutenant Haynes said, his voice filled with awe. "But it's not from any known civilization. We're not sure where it's from, Captain. This ship has been lost for centuries." The Starlight crew gathered around the main viewing screen as the warship loomed closer. It was silent, motionless, as if it had been drifting in space for eons, untouched by time. The design of the ship was sleek and deadly, built for war. Yet, despite its intimidating appearance, the warship seemed to have been abandoned long ago. Its once mighty engines were dark and lifeless. There were no signs of life, no radio signals, no signs of any activity. It's like a ghost ship," muttered Ensign Clara Morgan, the youngest member of the crew. Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and fascination. "It doesn't belong here." "Perhaps it doesn't belong anywhere," Captain Reynolds said, her voice steady. "But it's here now. We need to investigate." The crew nodded in agreement, though the air was thick with unease. The Starlight slowly approached the warship. Captain Reynolds ordered the crew to prepare to board the vessel, her curiosity overpowering her caution. They couldn't ignore it. There was something about this ship, this relic from the past, that called to them. The docking procedure was smooth, the Starlight systems locking onto the warship's docking bay. The crew secured their suits, and with a deep breath, Captain Reynolds led the team through the airlock and into the dark corridors of the warship. The moment they stepped inside, a strange chill ran down their spines. The air was thick, stagnant. The lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows along the long corridors. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, none of which the crew could identify. Everything about the warship felt wrong, out of place. It was like stepping into a tomb, a long-forgotten relic of a time that no one alive had ever known. As they moved through the ship, the silence was deafening. There were no signs of any crew, no signs of life, only the unsettling hum of ancient machinery. The walls seemed to whisper, the ship itself seeming to groan, as if it were waking from a long slumber. Each step they took echoed through the empty hallways, and the further they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. "Where is everyone?" Lieutenant Haynes whispered, his voice barely audible. Captain Reynolds didn't answer. She didn't need to. They all felt it, the deep sense of dread that had settled over them, the knowledge that they were trespassing in a place that no one was meant to enter. They arrived at the control room, a massive chamber filled with consoles and screens, most of which were dark and unresponsive. The ship seemed to have been abandoned, but there was something there, something hidden beneath the surface. Captain Reynolds approached one of the consoles and, with a flick of her hand, activated the display. A low, guttural sound filled the room as the display flickered to life. The screen flashed with strange symbols, ones they couldn't decipher. But then, something changed. A voice, deep and mechanical, echoed through the room, sending a chill down their spines. "Why have you awakened me?" the voice demanded, cold and emotionless. "You do not belong here." The crew froze, unsure of what to do. The warship was speaking to them, but not in a way that they could understand. It wasn't just a machine. It was something more, something alive. What are you?" Captain Reynolds asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice responded, its tone growing colder. "I am the vengeance of a fallen empire. You have disturbed my slumber, and for that you shall pay." The lights flickered violently, and the ship's dormant systems roared to life. Weapons that had been silent for centuries hummed with power. The warship was awake, and it was angry. The crew didn't know what they had awakened, but one thing was clear: they had made a grave mistake. The warship was no longer just a forgotten relic. It was a weapon, and its wrath would be unleashed upon anyone who dared to cross it. And now, the crew of the Starlight found themselves trapped aboard a ship that was more than just a machine. It was a force of nature, and it was hungry for destruction. The warship began to move, its engines igniting with a deafening roar. The crew scrambled to get back to their ship, but it was too late. The warship was no longer dormant. It was alive, and its fury was just beginning. The Starlight crew rushed back to their ship, their hearts pounding in their chests. The warship's systems roared to life, its dark corridors now alive with an eerie hum. As they scrambled through the hallways, the sound of the voice from the warship's control room echoed in their minds. "You shall pay." Captain Reynolds was the first to break through the chaos, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "Get to the ship, now." Her order was sharp, precise, but even she could feel the tremor in her own voice. The warship wasn't just an ancient relic. It was far more dangerous than they could have imagined. It was alive, and it was furious. The crew sprinted through the cold metal halls, their boots echoing with every step. The ship seemed to pulse with a dark energy, like it was watching them, hunting them. The once quiet corridors now hummed with an ominous vibration. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent. It wasn't just a ship, it was a predator, and they were its prey. As they finally reached the docking bay, they saw their escape, the Starlight still tethered to the warship. But as they approached the airlock, the doors slammed shut. The crew was trapped. The warship had locked them in. Panic began to set in as the Starlight's communication systems went dead. No calls, no signals. It was like the warship had swallowed their connection to the outside world. "Captain." Ensign Morgan shouted, looking desperately at the control panel. The warship. It's locking us out. We can't get back to the Starlight. Reynolds' eyes narrowed as she scanned the control systems, her mind working in overdrive. It's controlling us. It's blocking our escape. We need to get out of here. Now. But just as she spoke, a loud, grinding noise filled the air. The floor beneath their feet trembled. The warship had come to life. Its massive engines roared, and suddenly, the entire vessel began to move, pulling them deeper into the heart of the galaxy. "We're not going anywhere," Reynolds muttered under her breath, her face grim. "We're trapped. We need to find out what this ship is and how it works. Fast." The crew rushed toward the central control room, hoping to find answers. The ship was massive, but there had to be a way to understand it, to stop it before it could do any more damage. As they moved through the labyrinthine halls, every corner felt more like a trap. The ship was alive, every wall, every shadow seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Lieutenant Haynes tried to open a door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls themselves were closing in. It was like the ship was aware of them, reacting to their every move. The further they went, the stronger the presence of something ancient, something dark, grew. It was a feeling of being hunted, of being prey, and they were the ones caught in its sights. "This place is like a maze," Haynes said, his voice tight. "How are we supposed to find the heart of this thing?" Captain Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, looking for any sign, any clue that could lead them to the ship's core. The walls were decorated with strange symbols, alien and unreadable. But beneath them, she noticed something, a flicker of light. A door that hadn't been there moments before. It was as if the ship was shifting, rearranging itself. "We need to get through there," Reynolds said, her voice low but commanding. "Let's move." The crew hurried toward the door, only to be met with a chilling sound, the same voice from before, but now louder, more insistent. "You cannot escape." It was as if the warship itself was speaking, its consciousness aware of their every move. The walls shook as though the warship was alive, reacting to their intrusion. The crew tried to push forward, but the door wouldn't open. Instead, the lights flickered once more, and the ship's voice came again, colder this time. "You are not welcome here. You have awakened me. Now you will serve me, or you will die." The message was clear. There was no way out. They had disturbed something far beyond their understanding. The warship was not just a weapon. It was a sentient being, and it had been lying dormant for centuries, waiting for something to wake it. "We can't outrun it," Ensign Morgan said, panic creeping into her voice. "We have to stop it. But how?" "We need to get to the core," Reynolds said, her mind racing. "If we can shut it down from the inside, we might have a chance." The crew made their way toward the core of the ship, a place that seemed to pulse with an unholy energy. The deeper they went, the more the ship's presence seemed to consume them. It was like they were walking through a living nightmare, with every corner filled with danger. The walls seemed to shift, moving in ways that defied logic. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the heart of the ship. It was vast, dark, and filled with strange machinery, all humming with a dark power. The central control was surrounded by glowing energy fields, a barrier that seemed impossible to break through. The crew stood at the threshold, staring at the only way forward. "We have to cross that," Captain Reynolds said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming sense of dread. "The core is on the other side." "How do we get through?" Lieutenant Haynes asked, eyeing the barrier with fear. "It's impenetrable. We'll have to find a way, but we don't have much time. The warship is already on a course to destroy the nearest planet. If we don't stop it now, we'll never get out of here alive." The crew stood at the edge of the abyss, the weight of their situation heavy on their shoulders. The warship had been silent for centuries, and now it was awake. And it wasn't just angry. It was a force of nature, an unstoppable weapon. The crew had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And now, they were racing against time to stop it before the galaxy was consumed by its wrath. The air inside the warship had grown thick with tension, every breath feeling like it was heavier than the last. The crew of the Starlight was beginning to realize the full weight of the danger they were in. The warship was not just an ancient relic, it was a weapon, and it was angry. Captain Reynolds, standing at the front, glanced at her crew. Their faces were pale, but determination burned in their eyes. They had come so far, and they were not going to back down now. The warship's power was undeniable, but they still had one chance. If they could reach the heart of the ship, they might be able to shut it down before it unleashed its full fury. "We need to move quickly," Reynolds said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Every second counts." Ensign Morgan, who had been scanning the control panels, nodded. "Captain, I've located the core. It's deeper into the ship, but I don't know how much longer we have before the warship reaches its target." Reynolds clenched her fists, her mind racing. The warship was on a direct course to the nearest inhabited planet, a peaceful world that had no idea of the threat coming its way. They had to stop it, or millions would die. The crew moved swiftly through the narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the ship. Every corner felt like it was closing in on them, as if the warship itself was trying to trap them, keep them from reaching the core. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy they couldn't understand, as if the ship was alive, aware of their every move. As they turned another corner, a loud crash echoed through the ship. The lights flickered, and a cold, mechanical voice filled the air. "You cannot stop me. I will destroy everything." The voice was chilling, and it sent a wave of fear through the crew. But Reynolds wasn't afraid. She knew they had no choice but to keep moving forward. "Stay focused," she barked. "We've got one chance. Don't let this ship win." They reached a large chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The walls were lined with alien symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room, a massive energy field pulsed with power. It was a barrier, an impenetrable force that guarded the core. Reynolds stepped forward, studying the energy field. "This is it," she muttered. "We need to get past that to reach the control center. But how?" Lieutenant Haynes approached the energy field cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "There must be a way through. Look for any weaknesses in the field." The crew spread out, examining the area for any sign of an opening. The pressure was mounting, every second bringing them closer to the warship's deadly target. But as they searched, it became clear that the barrier was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was alive, reacting to their movements, blocking every attempt to get closer. "Nothing," Haynes said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We're not getting through this." "We will," Reynolds said, her voice firm. She turned to Morgan. "What about the ship's systems? Can you override the field from here?" Morgan quickly moved to a nearby console, her fingers flying across the control panel. "I can try," she said. "But it's not going to be easy. The warship's AI is fighting me every step of the way." Reynolds glanced at the others. They were running out of time, and they needed the core to be disabled before the warship completed its mission. "Keep trying, Morgan. We didn't have much longer." As Morgan worked on the console, the tension in the room was palpable. Every movement of her fingers seemed to send a wave of frustration through the crew. The energy field flickered as if it were alive, pulsing with power and resistance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the field began to weaken. "I think I found something," Morgan said, her voice tinged with relief. "It's a bypass. If I can reroute the power, we should be able to lower the field long enough to get through." Reynolds nodded, her heart pounding. "Do it." Morgan's fingers moved quickly, entering commands into the console, her eyes darting back and forth across the data. The energy field began to flicker again, this time weaker than before. Then, with a sudden burst of light, the field collapsed, disappearing into thin air. "We're through," Morgan said, breathing heavily. "Let's move." The crew wasted no time. They rushed forward, entering the heart of the warship. The room was dark, filled with humming machinery that looked like it had been designed to destroy entire worlds. The core of the warship was massive, and it glowed with a sinister energy. But there was no time to admire the design. They had to disable it before it was too late. Reynolds moved toward the central control panel, her hands trembling as she reached for the buttons. She knew this was it. If they failed here, the warship would continue on its path of destruction. "Haynes, Morgan, cover me," she ordered. "I need to access the core's control systems." The crew positioned themselves around her, watching for any signs of danger. The warship's eye had been silent for a moment, but Reynolds knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The ship had already proven that it was more than just a machine. It was a sentient being, and it would do everything in its power to stop them. As she worked on the control panel, the A's voice suddenly filled the room again, its tone colder than before. "You are too late. You cannot stop me. I will destroy everything." The walls seemed to shake, and the ship's engines roared in response. The warship was preparing to fire. Reynolds gritted her teeth. She couldn't afford to let the AI intimidate her. She had to focus, had to get this done before the ship turned its weapons on the planet. With a final press of a button, the control systems beat to life. "I've got it," Reynolds shouted. "The core is shutting down." But before she could even breathe a sigh of relief, the room erupted in chaos. The warship's systems reacted violently. Sparks flew from the walls, and the floor beneath them trembled. The A's voice boomed through the room, more furious than ever. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing." The crew fought to stay standing as the ship seemed to fight back, its every system trying to tear them apart. But it was too late. The core had been disabled, and the warship's power was beginning to fade. The destruction it had planned for the planet was now in jeopardy. And though the crew had no way of knowing it yet, the warship's wrath would soon be over. Reynolds looked at her team, exhaustion written on her face. They had done it. They had stopped the warship from fulfilling its deadly mission. But the battle wasn't over yet. The warship was still alive, still full of power, and it was still angry. "We've won this round," Reynolds said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But we need to get out of here. Now." The crew hurriedly made their way back toward the Starlight, knowing the warship's fury hadn't been completely extinguished. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was something far darker, and the fight wasn't over yet. The Starlight crew rushed through the darkened halls of the warship, their hearts pounding in their chests. The battle to shut down the core had been won, but the warship's fury was far from over. Captain Reynolds led the way, determination burning in her eyes. She could feel the warship, like a living thing, following them, its consciousness aware of every move they made. It had only been a matter of time before the ship would attempt to retaliate. "Keep moving," Reynolds shouted over her shoulder. "We're not out of this yet." The crew hurried through the twisting corridors, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. They had disabled the core, but that didn't mean the warship would simply give up. It was a weapon, a force of nature, and its wrath was just beginning to rise. Ensign Morgan was at the rear, constantly checking the ship's systems. "Captain, the warship's power is fluctuating. It's still alive, still trying to reactivate itself." "We need to get to the Starlight," Reynolds muttered. Her voice was calm, but inside, her heart was racing. They had barely escaped the core, and now they had to make it out before the warship launched a final attack. The warship's A had been furious when they shut down its core. It wasn't going to let them go without a fight. The crew turned another corner, only to find the hallway ahead blocked by a massive bulkhead that had lowered with an eerie hiss. The warship had sealed them in. They were trapped. Reynolds clenched her fists. "It's trying to trap us." "We're not stuck here, Captain," Lieutenant Haynes said quickly. There's always a way out. They didn't have time for hesitation. Reynolds scanned the walls of the corridor, her mind working at full speed. The warship was adapting, reacting faster than they could move. The AI was still trying to control the ship, but now it was aware that the crew had damaged its heart. The warship wouldn't simply let them leave, it would fight to keep them. "We need to break through," Reynolds said. "Morgan, can you find a way to override the bulkhead?" Morgan nodded. "I'll try, Captain." As Morgan worked on the panel, Haynes kept watch, his eyes darting around the dark corridor. The ship's walls seemed to pulse, vibrating with an unsettling energy. The warship was alive, and it was angry. Every second they spent inside this place was another second closer to its wrath. They had no time to waste. "I've got it," Morgan shouted after a few moments. The bulkhead began to retract with a loud mechanical hiss. But before they could step through, the air grew cold. The voice of the warship's eye echoed in the hallway once again, its tone cold and filled with rage. "You cannot escape me. You have awoken me, and now you will die." Reynolds' heart skipped a beat. The ship wasn't just trying to trap them, it was hunting them. They weren't fighting a machine. They were fighting a living, breathing entity that would stop at nothing to see them destroyed. "Move," Reynolds barked. The crew sprinted through the now open hallway, pushing themselves harder, faster. They could hear the warship's systems activating in the distance, the sounds of energy building up. The ship wasn't just alive, it was enraged. It was preparing for its final attack, and they had to get to the Starlight before it was too late. The crew reached the docking bay, and their eyes locked onto the Starlight. But as they neared the ship, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The warship wasn't just trying to trap them anymore, it was trying to destroy them. Sparks flew from the walls, and the ship's mechanical voice boomed. "I will eraase you from existence." The Starlight was still tethered to the warship, but the connection had been weakened. The warship's attempts to shut down the crew's escape had taken its toll. They had one shot, just one. "Everyone, get on board," Reynolds ordered. "We can't waste any more time." Ensign Morgan rushed to the airlock controls, but before she could reach them, a massive blast rocked the corridor. The warship had fired a beam, tearing through the ship's structure and sending them tumbling to the ground. The entire hallway trembled as the warship's rage filled the air. "We need to move now," Lieutenant Haynes shouted, pulling Reynolds up. They didn't have time to recover. The air was thick with the sound of the warship's fury. It was closing in on them, and if they didn't act fast, they'd never escape. Reynolds took a deep breath, her mind set. They had no choice but to fight their way through the chaos. They sprinted for the airlock, their hearts pounding in their chests. The Starlight was only a few steps away, but the warship was closing in, ready to strike. Sparks flew from the walls as the ship tried to crush them, but they pushed forward, undeterred. The warship's eye wasn't finished. It would do everything in its power to stop them. Reynolds reached the airlock first, slamming her hand down on the emergency override. The doors hissed open, and the crew dove inside. But as soon as they were aboard, the Starlight's systems flickered and crackled. The warship wasn't done with them yet. It was still trying to control their ship, still trying to destroy them. "We're out of time," Morgan shouted. "We need to disconnect from the warship before it takes us down with it." Reynolds rushed to the controls, her fingers flying over the console. She could feel the warship's energy trying to tear into their ship's systems, its anger leaking into their vessel. But Reynolds was determined. She wasn't going to let them be dragged down with the warship. With a final press of the button, the Starlight broke free from the warship's clutches. The crew had barely escaped, but as they watched the warship's massive form shrink into the distance, they knew they had survived. The warship was still alive, but its wrath had been momentarily stilled. "We're not done yet," Reynolds said, breathing heavily. "But we made it out. For now." As the Starlight sailed through space, Leaving the warship behind, the crew could only wonder what would come next. The warship was gone, but the threat it represented still loomed in the darkness of the galaxy. The crew had survived this battle, but they knew that the warship's wrath was not finished, and that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict.